This is the Commander's Beacon, and I am Eric. Let's talk about some unconventional Commander deck techs. And let's talk about Kels Fight Fixer. But actually first we need to talk about Wilhelt the Rotcleaver. Now, Wilhelt is a very popular and effective face commander for one of the two Innistrad Midnight Hunt commander decks. Wilhelt already has over 1,500 decks on EDHREC, compared to just 183 decks for the other Midnight Hunt deck face commander, Lenore Autumn Sovereign. And Wilhelt's popularity is not undeserved. First, it's a zombie tribal commander, and look, people love zombies almost as much as they love squirrels. But even among zombie commanders, Wilhelt is great. It's a black and blue commander, arguably the two most important colors for zombies. Wilhelt gives you an additional card draw at the end of each of your turns if you sacrifice a zombie, and Wilhelt can generate an unreasonable amount of zombie tokens for you by making a decayed zombie whenever a non-decayed zombie you control dies. And yes, that includes regular non-decayed 2/2 zombie tokens from pretty much any other source. So Wilhelt draws a little bit of cards and makes a lot of zombies. Now, the Wilhelt commander deck also introduced an alternative commander that generated some amount of hype, and that's Eloise Nephalia Sleuth. Eloise makes you a clue token whenever another creature you control dies. Again, any creature, a token, or whatever, it doesn't matter how it died, you get a clue. Not once per turn, not whenever one or more creatures you control die. No, you get one clue per creature. Now, Wizards really likes Investigate recently, it seems like, though I'm not personally convinced that clue tokens are all that great. Paying 2 mana and sacrificing a clue to draw a card is fine, but it's really hard to break clues unless you've got infinite mana or perhaps some other synergy with all of those artifact tokens that you're creating. Okay, so we're talking about Wilhelt and Eloise, and why are we doing that? Because I think we actually have another compelling alternative to these two Dimir zombie commanders with Kels Fight Fixer. Now let me explain. Kels is a 4/3 Azra Warlock that costs 2 black. She has Menace, and whenever you sacrifice a creature, you can pay Dimir, that's 1 blue or 1 black mana, and if you do, you draw a card. Now you can also pay 1 and sacrifice a creature to give Kels indestructible until end of turn. Now first, I really prefer Kels over Eloise. By itself, Kels lets you draw a card for 2 mana and sacrificing a creature, just like Eloise. And while Kels only triggers when you sacrifice a creature, not just when any of your creatures dies like Eloise does, Kels also comes with a built-in sacrifice outlet. And if you pair Kels with a free sacrifice outlet, then you can effectively reduce that cost to draw a card down to 1 mana, though it will need to be colored mana. Now Kels also costs 1 less mana than Eloise, and she protects herself, which is pretty important for a mid-costed commander that needs to stick around on the battlefield for a while to get value from it. So now let's make the tougher comparison. I'm going to make the argument that you should try using Kels as a pilot for your Dimir zombie tribal deck instead of Wilhelt. Now hear me out. Yes, we know that Wilhelt just vomits out tons and tons of zombies, and Kels does not. Wilhelt can even draw cards, though only 1 card on each of your turns. Kels can draw you a lot more cards, even though it will cost you 1 to 2 mana for each card. And again, Kels protects herself by giving herself indestructible. This is really important because attentive players probably won't let Wilhelt live for long, given how much value it can produce. But Kels is hard to remove, so she'll likely stick around for a little while. Now I also want to mention that decayed zombie tokens, these are the new ones in Innistrad Midnight Hunt, decayed actually works really, really well with Kels, because when your decayed zombies attack, you sacrifice them at the end of combat. This gives you a guaranteed Kels trigger to draw a card at that reduced mana cost, since you don't have to pay with Kels to sacrifice the creature. Now, the decayed zombie actually has to survive combat in order to automatically sacrifice itself, but you can still sacrifice it manually with Kels if it gets blocked to draw that card. So Kels can make a lot of use of our decayed zombies. And lastly, of course, don't forget that Kels has that built-in sacrifice outlet, which is amazing for any aristocrat's deck. So I want to argue that while Kels won't give you quite as many zombies as Wilhelt does, she does a better job at keeping her hand filled and dodging that commander tax, so Kels will be more consistent than Wilhelt. Now, let's talk about how to turn Kels into that consistent card-drawing zombie tribal machine, starting with the zombies. Now, unlike Wilhelt, Kels does not make her own zombies, and we need to sacrifice creatures to draw those cards, so we'll want to load this deck with lots and lots of cards that make disposable zombie tokens. Now, I like permanents that just periodically give us tokens for free. Dreadhorde Invasion makes a zombie army token for you at the beginning of your upkeep if you don't already have one, for just a 2-mana enchantment. There's Curse of Shallow Graves, Curse of Disturbance. These give you a zombie token whenever you attack the cursed player, or in the case of Curse of Disturbance, whenever anyone attacks the cursed player. There's Curse of the Restless Dead, another enchantment. It gives you a decayed zombie whenever the cursed player has a land enter the battlefield under their control. And Ghoulish Possession gives you a decayed zombie whenever any non-token creature dies, whether it's yours or one of your opponents, it doesn't matter. This ability does trigger only once per turn, though. There's even Endless Ranks of the Dead. This is a 4-mana enchantment that has, at the beginning of your upkeep, you create X 2/2 zombie creature tokens, where X is half of the number of zombies you control, rounded down. Now, Endless Ranks of the Dead can be really awesome, but just be aware that some of the time it's a 4-mana do-nothing enchantment. It won't trigger until your upkeep, and unless you have at least 2 zombies on the field at the beginning of your turn, it just won't make any zombies. But we really need token generators in this deck, and once you get going, Endless Ranks of the Dead is one of the best. So these are all really low maintenance ways to just keep generating zombie tokens over and over. And they're enchantments, so they're a bit hard to remove. But there are some creatures that can create zombie tokens for us too. Now first there's Wilhelt. He may not be leading the deck, but he's definitely in the 99. We've talked about Wilhelt enough for today, so let's move on. There's Jadar, Ghoulcaller of Nephalia, which makes a decayed zombie for you at the end of your turn, as long as you don't already have one. Cryptbreaker and Skirk Ridge Exhumer are both zombies that let you tap and discard a card and pay some mana to make a zombie token. Now, discarding a card to make a zombie isn't great, but since you can sacrifice that token to draw a card with Kels, you're basically just cycling through your deck. Liliana's Devotee isn't a zombie, but it does trigger at the beginning of your end step to let you pay 1 and a black and make a zombie token if a creature died this turn. This is a little bit mana intensive, but Liliana's Devotee also gives your zombies +1/+0, which is a pretty nice little payoff too. So I really like here that Liliana's Devotee both buffs our zombies and makes zombie tokens. So we're really getting that payoff for playing zombie tribal rather than just making whatever token we can make. And we're making zombie tokens at the same time, all in one card. But there are other cards that do this too. Let's look at some of the amass creatures for more of the spark. Eternal Skylord is a zombie that gives all of your zombie tokens flying, and you amass 2 when it enters the battlefield. Again, that means you'll either make a 0/0 zombie army token with 2 +1/+1 counters on it, if you don't already have a zombie army already. And if you do already have a zombie army, you'll instead put 2 +1/+1 counters on a zombie army that you already have. So again, buffing our zombies by giving them flying and making a zombie token at the same time, all in one card. There's Vizier of the Scorpion, same thing, amass 1, and it gives all your zombies tokens Death Touch. Gleaming Overseer has amass 1, and it gives your zombie tokens Menace and Hexproof. So these are some awesome ones that they're zombies in and of themselves, they make a zombie, and they buff your zombies. But we have other ways to buff our zombies while making them at the same time. Graph Harvest is a 1-mana enchantment that gives all of your zombies Menace, and it also lets you pay 3 and a black and exile a creature card from your graveyard to make a 2/2 black zombie token. Now, we're not playing much graveyard recursion in this deck. We mostly just want to make zombie tokens. So once you've got some creatures in your yard, don't feel bad about getting rid of them to make more tokens. There's Liliana's Mastery. This is a 5-mana enchantment. It gives all of your zombies +1/+1, and it makes 2/2 zombies when it enters the battlefield, so this is perfect. But we also need to remember that Kels basically turns all of our creatures into sort of cantrips. We can pay a little bit of mana into Kels and turn any of our creatures into draw a card. So we can even use one-off effects that make zombies, because when we turn that zombie into card draw with Kels, we'll stay at card parity rather than being at card disadvantage. Now, you know I like some incidental graveyard hate, so Rotten Reunion and Vile Rebirth are perfect. These are both 2-mana instants that let you exile a card from a graveyard. You can exile any card in the case of Rotten Reunion, or only a creature card in the case of Vile Rebirth. And for both of these cards, you will also create a 2/2 zombie token. And we don't care so much if these are situational cards, because again, Kels can just let us turn that zombie token into card draw. Also, Rotten Reunion has Flashback, which is even better, and the Flashback cost is very nice at only 2 mana. I'll even play Startle. This is a 2 mana instant that gives target creature -2/-0 until end of turn, and you make a 2/2 zombie with Decayed, and you draw a card. I mean, the ceiling on this card isn't very impressive, but it gives you a lot of value for just 2 mana. Now, there's a few more zombie token generators that I want to mention. First, of course, Liliana, Death's Majesty. And this is a 5 mana, 5 loyalty Liliana with a +1 that makes you a zombie token, and you mill 2 cards. -3, you return a creature from your graveyard to the battlefield, and that creature becomes a black zombie. And a -7 that destroys all non-zombie creatures. I don't really have much to say about Liliana here. It's an obvious value engine that can make us zombies reanimate our creatures, and it's a one-sided board wipe if we can plus it first a few times. Of course, there's also Liliana Dreadhorde General. I haven't included this one in the deck, mainly for budget purposes, but if you want to power up the deck, this is an obvious include. But I will use Wand of Orcus. Now this is a cool one. This is a 3 mana equipment, it costs 3 to equip, and whenever the equipped creature attacks or blocks, it and zombies you control gain Death Touch until end of turn. And whenever the equipped creature deals combat damage to a player, you make that many 2/2 black zombie creature tokens. Now Wand of Orcus is perfect to equip to Kels. Just attack any opponent with your commander, the wand will give her Death Touch, and she already has Menace. So your opponent will need to block her with at least 2 creatures, if they do want to block. And because she has Death Touch, both of those creatures will die. And you can even sacrifice a creature so that Kels won't die in combat. So your opponents are really disincentivized from blocking. And since Kels has 4 power, which is decent, you'll get to make 4 zombie tokens when she actually does combat damage to a player. And don't forget that Wand of Orcus gives all of your attacking zombies Death Touch too. So this makes it really hard for your opponents to profitably block your zombie horde. So Wand of Orcus is really cool in this deck. And lastly, we need to mention Death Tyrant. This is a 4/6 Beholder Skeleton that costs 4 and a black. It has Menace, and whenever an attacking creature you control or a blocking creature an opponent controls dies, you make a 2/2 black zombie token. Now Death Tyrant is awesome. Remember, your decayed zombies are sacrificed at the end of combat when they attack. So whether they get sacrificed or they get blocked and die, Death Tyrant will turn them into a new 2/2 zombie for you. Or whenever you sacrifice an attacking zombie to Kels during combat, Death Tyrant will make a new zombie for you. And we haven't even read the whole card yet. Death Tyrant also has pay 5 and a black to return Death Tyrant from your graveyard to the battlefield tapped. So it's got built-in recursion. This is an awesome card. Now those are most of our token generators, but we do have other zombies in this deck as well. Let's talk about those next. So we want most of our zombies to make more zombies, but some zombies are valuable enough that we'll include them even if they don't. Undead Augur is a 2/2 zombie that costs black, and it has whenever it or another zombie you control dies, you draw a card and lose 1 life. Obvious include. This includes token zombies. Now this isn't a zombie, but we will include Morbid Opportunist, which also draws you a card whenever any creature dies, whether it's yours or an opponent's, but this ability triggers only once each turn. Now we want card draw creatures like these rather than something like Midnight Reaper, because while Midnight Reaper might be a zombie, it only triggers to draw you a card when a non-token creature you control dies. Morbid Opportunist and Undead Augur conversely will trigger a card when our zombie tokens die. And tokens are going to be most of our zombies in this deck, so we really won't get much value from something like Midnight Reaper. Now there's also lots of zombie lords, but I'm not including most of them because we really just need token generators to fuel Kels. But I will include Diregraph Captain. And not only does he give your zombies +1/+1, but it also has target opponent lose 1 life whenever one of your zombies dies. So it's giving you a payoff for doing what you're going to do anyways. Now I couldn't make space for Plague Belcher in this deck, but you could swap Diregraph Captain for it. A Plague Belcher doesn't give your zombies +1/+1, but it does cause each opponent to lose 1 life whenever one of your zombies dies, rather than just a single target opponent like Diregraph Captain. Again, I didn't include Plague Belcher in this deck, but it is a good fit, so definitely make space for it if you like it. Now I do like Scourge of Neltoth. This is just a big, aggressive 6/6 zombie dragon with flying, but you can cast it from your graveyard by paying black and sacrificing 2 creatures rather than paying its mana cost. So Scourge of Neltoth is a big aerial presence and a sacrifice outlet. Because with Kels on the battlefield, you can essentially choose to pay up to 4 total mana when you sacrifice those 2 creatures to cast the Scourge from your graveyard, paying the black to cast it, and paying the 2 Dimir for the sacrifice triggers to Kels. And then if you do, you get to draw 2 cards. Now speaking of sacrifice outlets, again, we want those free sacrifice outlets, because Kels can sacrifice creatures on her own, but it costs mana. And when we have free sacrifice outlets, we can reduce the cost to draw a card with Kels down to just 1 mana. Carrion Feeder is pretty ideal here. It costs just a single black. It's a zombie. You can sacrifice creatures for free whenever you want. It can't block, but we really don't care about that. Now I also like Grimgrin Corpseborn. This one's a bit more expensive at 5 mana. Grimgrin is also a zombie. It enters the battlefield tapped, and it doesn't untap during your untap step. But you can sacrifice another creature to put a +1/+1 counter on Grimgrin and untap it. So again, a free sacrifice outlet that you can use whenever you want. Also, whenever Grimgrin attacks, you get to destroy target creature defending player controls and put a +1/+1 counter on Grimgrin. So it's decent repeatable creature removal if your opponents don't get rid of it. We'll also use Viscera Seer, Woe Strider, and Yahenni Undying Partisan. These aren't zombies, but they are free sacrifice outlets with some upside. And again, that means we can sacrifice creatures to draw cards with Kels for only a single mana instead of 2 total mana. So that's actually most of the deck. Again, we have lots of cards that make zombie tokens, and some other zombies as well that give us some synergistic value. But I do still want to talk about some of the other synergistic pieces in this deck. Let's go over those next. Now, we're not playing a full Aristocrats deck, but we will include a couple of the most mana-efficient and resilient Aristocrat payoffs. I feel like I'm saying that on a lot of my deck techs. Anyways, we will use Zulaport Cutthroat and Bastion of Remembrance. Each of these drains each opponent for 1 life, and we gain 1 life whenever one of our creatures dies. There are other Aristocrat cards you could include, but I wanted to focus more on making zombies. We mentioned some of our sacrifice outlets, but we do have others as well. Village Rites and Plumb the Forbidden are card draw spells that let us sacrifice creatures as an additional cost to cast them. And because they'll also trigger Kels, we can draw even more cards with these. And as long as we're making zombie tokens, Idol of Oblivion will give us easy, repeatable card draw turn after turn. Now we'll also use High Market and Phyrexian Tower, both of which are lands that let us sacrifice creatures. Now I also like Westvale Abbey. This taps for a colorless, or you can pay 5 and tap it to make a 1/1 creature token. That's usually not worth it unless you have nothing better to do, but you can also pay 5 and tap it and sacrifice 5 creatures to transform Westvale Abbey and untap it. And it transforms into Ormondal Profane Prince, which is just a 9/7 demon with flying, lifelink, indestructible, and haste. So Ormondal will end games. And don't forget, when you sacrifice those 5 creatures to transform Westvale Abbey, if you happen to have an extra 5 colored mana lying around and Kels is on the field, you can draw up to 5 cards too. Now when it comes to ramp, I'm straying a little bit from the conventional 2-mana rocks. Yes, we will still use them, but there are also a few slightly more expensive ramp pieces that give us some nice value. Heraldic Banner is one that I've been trying out a lot recently, and it does give you some good value in the right deck. This is a 3-mana rock that lets you pick a color when it enters the battlefield. It can only tap for mana of that color, but it also gives creatures you control of that color +1/+0. Since most of our creatures are black, this is just a free anthem on a mana rock, so that's great. I'll also use the new Crowded Crypt. This is a 3-mana rock that taps for black, and whenever a creature you control dies, you put a crypt counter on it. And then you can pay 4 black and tap and sacrifice Crowded Crypt to make a 2/2 zombie token with Decayed for each crypt counter on it. So this is another slightly overcosted mana rock, but you can turn it into a bunch of zombies later. So I like these mana ramp spells that have some additional upside. Speaking of ramp with upside, Pitiless Plunderer has none. He's all ramp. But it's a lot of ramp. Pitiless Plunderer makes you a treasure token whenever one of your creatures dies. Yes, that includes creature tokens. This is a $13 uncommon that's in 28,000 decks on EDHREC, so it's a fairly obvious include, but it works well, we'll use it. Now when it comes to removal, we do have a few synergistic inclusions that I'd like to mention. First, whenever my deck has blue and my commander has 4 or more power, I've really been liking Stubborn Denial. This is a single blue mana for an instant that counters target non-creature spell unless its controller pays 1. But it also has Ferocious. That is, if you control a creature with power 4 or greater, such as Kels, then you just counter that spell instead. Stubborn Denial is $1. This is a budget Fierce Guardianship, a $40 plus card, in any deck where your commander has at least 4 power. So I've really liked Stubborn Denial. Now we'll also use Perplexing Test. This is a 5-mana instant that lets you either return all non-token creatures to their owner's hands, or return all token creatures to their owner's hands. Since we're largely relying on zombie tokens, this can possibly clear out all of our opponent's blockers to let us get in for some combat damage. And of course there's Necrotic Hex, which has each player sacrifice 6 creatures, and we make 6 2/2 zombie tokens. So this is often a board wipe that leaves us with a battlefield full of tribal fodder. So that's Kels Fight Fixer Zombie Tribal. As always, I didn't mention every single card in the deck, but you can see the link to the full deck list in the description. Now let's go over the deck stats and cost. Alright, deck stats. This Kels Fight Fixer Zombie Tribal deck has an average mana value of just 2.77, which is fairly aggressive for a casual deck. We have 27 cards that make zombie tokens. Some of them are repeatable, like Jadar, Ghoulcaller of Nephalia. Some of them are single-use, like Lazotep Plating. This deck has a total of 21 creature cards, not counting the commander. Some of those creatures make zombie tokens, and some of them are just support creatures or other zombies. Speaking of which, of those 21 creature cards, 12 of them are zombies themselves. We have 12 sacrifice outlets, and most of them cost no mana to activate. Some of them are single use, or you need to tap to activate them, so they may only activate once per turn. And some of them are repeatable, and we can use them as many times as we want. So these are going to help us reduce the total mana cost that we need to draw cards with Kels. This deck has 9 ramp cards and 8 card draw cards, not counting the commander. Given that Kels' main purpose is to draw us cards, this deck has felt pretty consistent, even with only 8 other card draw spells. And finally, we have 11 pieces of single target removal and 3 board wipes. At the time of this recording, this deck has a value of $170.97 on tcgplayer.com. There are some higher budget cards you could add to make this deck perform better. We already mentioned Liliana Dreadhorde General, which is absolutely amazing. I would also like to add Phyrexian Altar, which lets you sacrifice a creature to produce 1 mana of any color, which you can use that mana to pay for Kels' card draw trigger, effectively allowing you to sacrifice a creature and draw a card for free. I think Phyrexian Altar is also $70 or something, and that's why it's not in the list. Now, if you wanted to reduce the deck budget, we do have a few $10-ish or more cards that you might cut. Phyrexian Tower is about $17, and it's a nice sacrifice outlet on land, but you don't really need it, so if you're on a budget, this is a good one to cut and save some money. Grimgrin Corpseborn is a nice sacrifice outlet that can also attack well and kill creatures, but it's a little bit slow to do this, and if you're just using it as a sacrifice outlet, it's overcosted at 5 mana. It's also $16, so I would definitely cut this for a cheaper sacrifice outlet if you want to reduce the budget. Now there's a few somewhat pricier cards in this deck that you could cut if you absolutely need to, but I wouldn't recommend it, again, unless you really have to, because they provide a lot of value for the deck. Of course, Pitiless Plunderer is amazing, but as we said, it's, $12, $13. Wand of Orcus is almost $10, but it can generate a bunch of zombie tokens and make your army hard to block, so this is a great card in the deck that I would leave in if possible. Westvale Abbey is about $10, but it can be a great finisher, and it's a sacrifice outlet if you need it, or if you just really need to make tokens. And then there's Cryptbreaker. This is that 1-mana zombie that can make zombie tokens for you, and it lets you tap your zombies to draw cards. This is a lot of value at a really great mana cost, but Cryptbreaker is also $9. So cut it if you need to, but if you have a way to keep it in the deck, I would recommend doing so. Anyways, that is Kels Fight Fixer Zombie Tribal. Okay, so I hope I've convinced you that you might want to try Kels Fight Fixer as an alternative pilot to your Wilhelt zombie tribal deck. Kels may not generate zombies as fast as Wilhelt, but she does give you more card draw and a built-in sacrifice outlet. And again, she's much more resilient. Or if you were considering Eloise Nephalia Sleuth, I would also like to remind you that Kels is probably just better most of the time, and otherwise does about the same thing. I really like commanders that protect themselves, well at least, protect themselves without being really obvious threats like Sigarda, Host of Herons. And Kels is great here. It's not super threatening, but it is hard to kill, and this combination will let her sit on the battlefield for a while, generating lots of value for you over time. And because the zombie tribe is so well supported, you have no shortage of great synergistic cards to play. But that is all I've got for today. So we are now in the beginning of Innistrad Crimson Vow spoilers, so I'm hoping to have some content from this upcoming set next time. It's hard to say yet which cards or which mechanics I'll be focusing on, since the spoilers haven't concluded yet at the time that I'm recording this podcast. But certainly let me know in the comments if you have any suggestions or recommendations for new commanders or new builds that you'd like to see, especially unconventional ones. But again, that's all I have for today. Thanks again for watching. We'll see you next time.